Good morning, everybody. Okay, everything is moving. I will just start with my presentation. So we're going to talk about the benefits of multi-gigabit Ethernet first. Then I will introduce our new switches, talk about the switch families, and show some new stuff. I have a full presentation which is downloadable in the handouts. And it includes a lot of sheets I will skip during the presentation because if I included those, it would be way too long. So let's start. First, about the benefits of the multi-gigabit Ethernet. What's multi-gigabit Ethernet? Multi-gigabit Ethernet that are all the Ethernets that can run at more than 1 gigabit speed. So 2.5 gigabit, 5 gigabit, or even 10 gigabit speeds. And up to 5 gigabits, we can use existing Ethernet wires at their full about 100 meters, at least if it is good quality. Why do you need a multi-gigabit? Well, to future-proof your network, and because there's just more data that we want to pass over. And well, maybe it's not really a problem that it solves, but it enables you to use your current wiring for higher speeds. And that saves people money when they want to migrate to higher speeds. So the current gigabit standard, well, is still used by most devices, but not all of them. Laptops, desktops, printers, routers. But we're seeing data throughput performance bottlenecks because we have more end users, more devices per user, new wireless standards, heavier throughput requirements by applications, 4K video, 1080 IP streams, and putting those all together, well, it's your 1 gigabit gets eaten up really fast. So before, with wireless, we had a bottleneck in the wireless part because wireless N did not achieve much more than 300 megabits. So the bottleneck was always there. But with the AC and AX standards, especially the AX standards, we're seeing that the bottleneck has moved from our wired connection to, or from our wireless connection to our wired connection. For now, for our Wi-Fi 6 APs, 2.5 gigabit is the best solution. You can see here, we made this, my colleagues in Taiwan did a small test with two EWS 377 APs, and they measured the Wi-Fi throughput between two EPs using first 2908P switches, so 1 gigabit switches, and they measured that the throughput was about 1 megabit, more or less line speed, if you take into account the overhead. If you change the switches to switches that support 10 gigabit or 2.5 gigabit, then you suddenly see that the speeds jumps up to, again, almost line speed, just a little bit below that. So the EWS377 is a 4x4 AP. With a 357 AP, you will have slightly less speed. So this is a nice way to see that you really get something additional from using the switches which support 2.5 gigabit ports. So where would you use these kinds of switches? Well, mostly in where you connect the infrastructure devices. So where you connect the PCs. A lot of PC motherboards nowadays support 2.5 gigabit. Laptops maybe even with 2.5 gigabit ports, and stuff like NAS, network attached storage, and also your APs in this case are 377s or 230s or 220s. You can also connect them up and get the faster speeds. This is more or less a repeat of the previous page. So the target market for these multi-gigabit switches are SMB, education, hospitality, and so on. The SMB needs video, voice, data, media speeds. Hospitality requires more bandwidth because they have more concurrent clients. Education wants real-time online teaching, lag-free streaming. And we want to combine this with our cloud management platform to enable simplified switch management, more visibility and troubleshooting, and of course, also remote management and remote troubleshooting. So this was this is our family of cloud managed switches, and we see that we added 2 new ones, the ECS2252 FP and the ECS2528 FP, which are full PoE switches with 2.5 gigabits. So the key features of these are they have multi-gigabit ports, they have 802.3 AF80 full PoE on all Ethernet ports. They have the surveillance switch features, and they are of course part of their multi-gig family, and also part of our hybrid manageable series family. So I think it's very important to note that not all of the gigabit ports, not all of the Ethernet ports are multi-gigabit ports. 1/3 of them are 2.5 gigabit ports. So you have 1/3 as gigabit ports, and the other 2/3 are still 1 gigabit ports, which is okay because all of the Ethernet ports are PoE plus, and you still need to connect your 100 megabit and 1 gigabit PoE devices also, and you can connect those to the slow 1 gigabit ports and put your 2.5 gigabit capable devices to the fast ports. So slow PoE devices, think of your VoIP phones, which may have 100 megabit ports even. IP cameras, which may have 100 megabit or 1 gigabit ports, most Wi-Fi 5 APs, and of course all the earlier IPs which will have 100 gigabit ports. So the surveillance features, I'm sure James talked about this before. The PoE extended mode, this is to allow longer cable runs than the usual 100 meters, or actually 300 feet, I think, up to 250 meters. It depends on the cable quality. If it's really bad, it will be less. It also depends on the AP hardware. It could be less, but in optimal situations, you can reach 250 meters instead of needing to put in 2 additional switches to get all the way over there. It comes at a cost because the data rate is only 10 megabits, which should be enough for any normal PoE camera. You can expect those to have 4, 5, 6 megabit of data rate. So for the near ones, you can just use the normal mode, and for the ones that are further away, you can use extended mode. The next surveillance feature is the PoE lifeguard function. This uses LLDP or just pings to check the status of the connected device. It does not need to be a camera. It could also be a other type of powered device like a IP phone. It sends requests to the device, and if the device does not answer for a couple of times, then it will do a power cycle on the port. And you can assume that in most cases the devices just froze. They shouldn't, but they do. And that after the reboot, it will be back to normal. So instead of you needing to, or you're only finding out that your device went offline last night sometime and it didn't register anything during the whole night, it will only be off for maybe a few minutes and then be recovered by your switch. And the last function that it has is the continuous PoE power function. So normally if you do a reboot of the device because of a firmware upgrade or just because you're doing a reboot, all the attached PoE devices also get a power cycle because the PoE ports go down. In this case, if you do a firmware upgrade and it has a reboot, the PoE power will stay up during the whole time, so your connected devices will not go down. They may have a time gap because the switch for a short while will probably not forward any packets, but as soon as the forwarding is running again, the camera is able to send its streams again to the platform. So you, instead of having first the time for the switch to reboot and then again the time for the access points to reboot, you will only have a short gap in the period that the switch itself was rebooting and not able to forward packets. It is important to note that if you want to use the PoE extended mode, PD lifeguard, and PoE continuous power, that this requires a cloud-based version if you want to manage those. For the other the modes, like with Easy Master or standalone, you can configure this without a license. So because we now have talk about the hybrid management. The hybrid management is that you can use the switch, manage the switch either by cloud management or by our on-premises management, EasyMaster or SkyKey, or standalone. So you have these just choices. It's not all not and, it's or. So it's or cloud management or on-premises management or standalone. That said, there are some features that you cannot configure in switches. A few with cloud management and a lot with on-premises management that you still need to go into the switch itself, and you get the whole or part of the management spaces just like in standalone, and you need to configure it there. So that's important to note. This is different from the APs, where in the APs, the devices are really totally managed by your EasyMaster or by your cloud. And that said, by the EasyMaster, the number of things that you can configure on switches is very limited. On the cloud, the number of things that you need to manage locally is very limited. So the cloud is much more expensive in the switch settings. So the target market and the comparisons. So for our cloud, anything which has branch offices, or actually we would want to use that for everything that you want remote management for. The EasyMaster only when cloud is not an option. And yeah, well, if you only have a single device, then standalone will probably be good enough. But even there, cloud management can have its benefits, especially if some outside company like you needs to manage the device. We can still have a situation that we have all of them. It's not like that if you manage one site in the cloud that you need to manage all the sites in the cloud, or if you manage one site with EasyMaster that you need to manage all of them. Of course, it's easier if you only have a single point of entry and do everything, but you can mix. So basically our switches have the usual features you can expect from any layer 2+ device. I think it might be important to note that the switching capacity of all our switches is non-blocking. I noticed that in all our sheets they put in values, but if you calculate the values, then you find that if you max out all the ports, that is when you get the value, so they're non-blocking. If you want a bigger list, you can just look it up at our site, on our website. Next, I want to show off some new of our cloud switch diagnostics. By the way, if anybody has any questions, just put them in the question thing. And again, you can download the presentation in the handout section of GoToWebinar. So if you connect up to the cloud, then you can get a list of your switches. And if you go behind the switch somewhere, then you see something pop up. and you can click on Diagnostics, and then you see a screen popping up, which will show the activity of the switches, and you can select a device to test, to do a cable test. And then if you click on test, it will take a little while, and then it will show if the wiring is correct. So this is a very nice feature to check if people did something weird with the wiring. I do not have any bad wires in my home at the moment, so I wasn't able to check how it would look if what would show up when I used really bad wiring. There are more screens, and you can click on the arrow to go to them, and then you will have a thing that can show the trace route of the device. So you can see something about how fast it's connecting to the thing, and it can also show a ARP table, which is empty here, but if I scroll on, then you will see that there is a client list. Note that the client list here, well, I remove some stuff, do not need to know everything. The client list is a pro feature. So if you want to see which MAC addresses are connected to which ports on which VLANs, then you need to have a license for that. And again, for the first year, the license is free. That said, where you may have lots and lots and lots of IPs in a network, the number of switches you have in a network are not that high. So having a pro license for your switches is probably something which is easier. And again, within our cloud, we have a separation between having your APs licensed or your switches licensed. So those are separate choices. And when I pass through, then you will see that I wind back to the activity list. So the other thing that I wanted to show is our new local UI. Again, you can sign in to the switch, and then you see the summary screen. And from the summary screen, you notice that it looks more or less like the cloud. However, the menus are somewhat different. Everything is more square, and how would I say, it's purple. You can select your things like the real-time meters. If you want to access this when you have the device cloud managed, you need to configure this in the cloud and say to allow you to still access the web interface. This is different from the AP. From the AP, you can always access the local UI, but the cloud managed APs have a very limited UI, and for the switches, it's a full UI. You can change most settings, but as soon as you do anything with the cloud, you can assume that if those settings are managed by the cloud, they will be overruled. So make your settings changes in the cloud and not in the switch itself, unless it's something that you can only do in the switch. Here again, you can get a list of all the MAC addresses that are connected to the device on a port. Notice that I'm not using one of our new switches, but one of our gigabit, the 10 gig switches. But the interface is exactly the same for all of these devices. Only with the 28 you will have more ports, of course, and with the 2552 even more ports that you can manage. You can get SFP information if you have any SFPs in the device. We also have some layer 3 stuff in all these switches: EGMP snooping, MLD snooping, DHCP snooping, DHCP relays, and even static routes. We have some quality of service stuff, like storm control, port quality of service, DSCP mapping, and quality of service mapping. So these are mapping the layer 3 information to 802.1p priority bits. And all our switches have a dual image. So if you upgrade a switch, you can switch back to the previous version if you want to. At least if you always upgrade to the backup partition and make that active, then you will have your previous version as a backup after that. In the switch itself, you also have the diagnostic mode, so you can select the port and test the cabling. And here again, after testing, you will see if your cable is okay or not. Actually, the cable here is a patch cable, so that is a very short patch cable. I think it's 50 centimeters, so the length measurement is actually correct. We also have some security settings in the device, which you can do. So 802.1x, you can configure radius server. So not the radius server is not inside the device itself, but you can configure it to connect to a radius server. So that's today's presentation. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. So at least one person is happy that he gets a configuration choice as he was looking for. By the way, I think the management, we also have it for the APs. These things, I think it's really cool to have this remote and to figure out if anything is wrong with your device. I'm getting a question about the 1528 FP is not locally. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on what you mean. So there are two things. First, I was showing off the new web interface. So you need to have the latest firmware in it for it to show purple. And the second thing is that if you also manage the device via the cloud, through the cloud, then there is a switch you need to set to enable it for local management. And only when you have enabled that, will you be able to log into the switch locally and see its settings. And yes, I'm pretty sure that if you have the local management with the new firmware, you can configure VLANs and IPs. Although maybe I was wrong, and my assumption that the older switches also have the same layer 3 functionality is incorrect. I can check that out. I will get back to that at a later moment when I have been able to verify that. Okay, any more questions? So I think the most important takeaway would be that this part, that not all the ports are 2.5 gigabits, only 1/3. And that should be okay. So if you didn't do it already, the PDF can still be downloaded from the handouts, which you should be able to find if you click on the orange arrow, and then there's a thing that's called handouts that you can click on to get it. For availability and pricing, contact our sales. If you have, oh yes, the multi-port are marked. They have a different color. It was not really easy to see in my little pictures, but the coloring is different, and it's there are always the upper ports. Though the lower ports are 1 gigabit, the upper ports are 2.5, and those are next to the 10 gigabit SFP connections. If you think of any questions about technical questions at a later time, just send those to support@ingeniusnetworks.eu, and I will host a product talk about new EnGenius APs in 2 weeks' time. Anyone still struggling to download the PDF? Because as soon as I close it, then it will no longer be possible. Okay. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.